Well, we will get started. It is September already.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. Cool. Okay, so I actually fixed it this time, so I made it a little bit better than the Google link. So that is just, like I said, the 2020 survey that I would... Cool. Thanks, MDS. I appreciate letting me know that you can hear me. That is a survey. I really would like everybody to kind of fill this out if you can. It's super, super short, but this is a chance for me. You know, I know part of the, I won't say issues that I have is that, you know, I use Unreal on a day-to-day basis. That's what we do at our studio, and so I know the tools, I know the things that we do, and I think a lot of times I forget what are some of the stumbling blocks or hurdles that everybody has. And so this survey is really designed more for me to gauge a little bit and know what kind of content to present to everybody. So if you guys don't mind filling it out, I'll keep that up there. This is the slide decks are also available too. And of course, obviously we're live streaming this and recording it. So I should be able to post this on YouTube for everybody, so you guys can review this afterwards. So really, in terms of scheduling, we really only have one more left. Primary reason for that is in November, I've got a baby girl that's due, kind of late November, so I'm going to make sure that my window's open in case she decides to come a little early. But I'm thinking actually for our next meetup, actually just doing a kind of like a happy hour, just get kind of a nice space, good beers, good drinks, and stuff like that. So if you guys are up for that, just kind of a fun hang. So that's kind of the plan for next time. Cool. Okay, sweet. You're gonna love this question. Insert question here. I really honestly, I was trying to think of something to come up with that would be a good kind of icebreaker, but I think one that I'd like to discuss too is what do you guys think about the dev scene here in Kansas City? Pros, cons, what would you want to see differently? What are your thoughts? Nothing? Hey.
I'm in the user group.
Cool. Welcome. Take a seat. We're actually kind of getting started.
As far as I know, the dev scene just doubled in size. Really, that last meetup, this group was the first time I've ever been involved socially with
Yeah.
devs. So I can't speak to it much.
Yeah.
I'm not from around here,
I'm not from around here. Okay.
so I
Okay.
can't speak to the dev scene here.
Okay, well, we'll skip it. Part of that was too, it comes from, because last weekend I was out in St. Louis for Pixel Pop Festival, Indie Festival, and that was really encouraging to see, and I was actually very surprised, pleasantly surprised at the dev scene out there. It was actually really cool. So.
Are there actually your game company is the only one I know of in Kansas City? Are there others? Like how many are there?
So as far as I know, there's. Are you talking about just like for game dev, or more specifically using game engine stuff?
I just say any sort of game dev.
Yeah.
You know,
So
there are companies that do that either exclusively or primarily.
So as far as I know, Bad Rhino, my studio, is the only major one. There's a couple other indie studios. In fact, actually one that was out there, I'm going blank on their name, but they don't do it full time. It's more hobbyist stuff. There are a couple other companies, like I know Pulse Design, I'm going blank on one. I know the CEO of it, that they use Unreal, but it's for non-gaming applications, and they exist here and they do that full time. So I know, at least at the top of my head, a small handful of about maybe 5 or 6 companies that use Unreal / Unity on a full-time basis. Yeah, I wish there was more. So, all right, cool. So we'll dive in. There's a couple events coming up. I know most of you guys have seen this, but if you need additional information, where to find some stuff. In fact, actually, we'll make note of these as well today. There's a couple links in there just to find more information where you can actually get the engine and everything like that. I guess I should say for you guys that are new here, so what this is an official kind of arm of Epic Games for Unreal. So Fortnite developer, all that. I say sponsor, but we've got a main line to them. So really what I'm presenting here is more based in Unreal Engine, but it applies to just game dev topics in general. And it's like kind of, the game dev scene, careers in game development, that kind of stuff. So my name is Ryan Manning. I actually run Bad Rhino Studios, so the game studio here in Kansas City, and we primarily use Unreal Engine. So from that aspect, I am an advanced user of it. So, but I try to make sure that it's not like too deep that you guys can't follow. So, but yeah, so a couple events coming up. It actually starts, I think, tomorrow. The Business of Indie Games is kind of cool. It's a free kind of webinar. I forgot to put the link in there, but if you just search it, that's one that's going to be kind of cool. And then coming up at the end of this week, I think, is TwitchCon out in San Diego. So I don't know if anybody's going to that one, but obviously that's kind of a cool one.
And I
Cool.
think Epic has something in October 9th. It's their Indie Dev Days.
Oh yeah, you're talking. Yeah, so this is actually the first event. This is actually the first one of these. It's out in Portland, I believe, because they've got a satellite office there. It's an indie one, but I think it's more catered towards larger teams. I did check on that one, but that should be pretty cool. If you guys haven't been to any of the Epic events that are more on the training base, they're an absolute blast. They are extremely fun. So yeah, that's the thing in October. If you guys need more information, let me know. But I know it's publicly posted.
Sorry, is that an in-person event?
Yes.
Yes.
So if they do it anything like they have in the past, they will record them or pre-record their talks. If you attend the event, you get 60 days advanced access to the video. So as soon as they're ready, you can watch them. And I think after about 60 days is when the public can go back in and watch them as well.
That's when they put them out on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And Twitch.
I will say that they are awesome networking events. They're very, I know in some events where you've got the speaker on a podium and then they just disappear into the background, it's kind of the opposite of that. You get to really discuss with them. So on the agenda for kind of wrapping up this year, today is going to be kind of just a crash course through UE4. I found it very surprising that it seems like some people still don't understand that Unreal Engine is free and it's completely accessible. And so what I'm going to do is just try to show you guys from kind of start to finish how to jump in, how to dive, how to actually build something and actually deploy it. So we'll try to cover quite a bit in a short amount of time. And of course, at any point in time, if you guys have questions, interrupt. Luckily, we're a small enough group here right now that should be totally doable. And then in October, like I said, I'm really considering doing like a kind of like a little happy hour appetizer, just get like a little space somewhere, maybe downtown. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know if you got thoughts on places too. I think that'd be kind of fun just to chill at the end of the year and wrap up. And then of course in November, no meetup because my baby girl's coming, so I want to be ready on that one. All right, cool. You guys ready for the crash course? All right, so I think for the most part, you know where Unreal Engine is, right? How to get it. You use Unreal Engine. I know you do. Do you guys use Unreal Engine before? No. Cool. Okay. Yes. Yes, my talk's gonna. Yes. I want to get blank stares. Okay, cool. Do you guys know? First question. Do you know it's free?
Yes.
Okay, good. I joke about that one too. But out in St. Louis at Pixel Pop, we actually were in Epic's booth, so we kind of helped run that and stuff. The sheer amount of conversations I had with people that were like, no, it's way more expensive than Unity. I'm like, well, how expensive is free? Because that's what it is. I'm like, that's not free. It is free. In fact, I forgot to screenshot it. Really, the stipulations are up to $12,000 a year, so $3,000 per quarter. You get to keep. You don't pay anything. If you go above $3,000 in profit a quarter, you pay 5% royalties to Epic.
In sales, right?
Yeah, it's sales.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. They do have it in their EULA, but that's extremely agreeable. The other thing too is, which is a side note, if you do on the Epic Store, obviously that's an 80/80/12. If you sell content, that's an 88/12. So you get to keep 88% of your profit versus like Steam where it's
70/30.
insane. Yeah, 70/30. I hate it. I don't like Steam.
That's for games. You did stuff on the marketplace also, which has kind of caught my eye.
Marketplace is 88/12. Same thing.
Okay, cool.
So as a creator, if you create content on the marketplace, you keep 88% of your sales. Which is nice. Okay, cool. So the first one, where do you get Unreal Engine 4? If you've downloaded Fortnite or any other game from the Epic Store, you have the engine. It's there. So if I pull this up, so this is the Epic launcher, which you guys have probably seen. You literally just go to Unreal Engine, click it, and your library, and then you can add any of your engine versions, and that's it. So in this case, if I wanted to add 418, I can install it right there. Or if I wanted to, no, I don't, 423, or select whatever I want to install. That's it. And you literally have the engine at that point. Now, one thing I do want to make note of is the difference between a source build and a marketplace build. So I don't confuse you guys on this one. So by using this launcher, the Epic launcher, you are downloading what is considered a marketplace build, which is great. It's totally fine. It's everything that you need, minus source control in the sense of all the source files. So if you're building just a simple project, or you wanted to do something that's relatively lightweight, or you don't need to access all like the C++ code, just use the launcher version. The nice part about this is that these engine files reside on your computer. So as you know, so if we're all working on a project together, we can have the project and pass it between us, and everybody have their own standalone engines. If we were to use a source build of the engine, then you're actually going to have everything packaged with it. So I don't know if you guys can see this very well. So the screenshot that I took on the left, this is the actual engine files itself just residing in its own location. And then the project is in its separate one. The one on the right, this is an actual source build. So if you notice, I still have the project there, but the engine files are in there as well. So if you consider when you would want to do this, anytime that you want to accessing like engine level stuff, so like C++ code or injects, then you would probably consider source. But if you're just starting out, or you're just wanting to kind of tinker with it, literally just go to the launcher, click your library, add the engine, and you've got it. Yeah. So, and if you wanted to build a project, which I'll show you guys how to do that. So if I'm just going to launch like 422.3, I just click launch, and it'll give it a second, and it'll pop up. Maybe here in a second. I do have the engine running too, so I'll show you guys in a minute. But let's see if it pops up here. Maybe. It's just taking a while. Okay. Anyways, I don't know why that's taking so long, but it'll pop up a little window, and in there you actually have some preset templates that you can use. I'll try clicking this again, which is great. So, oh, there we go. So this is perfect if you have, there we go, right here. So you can go to new project, and there's a couple different things. So Unreal Studio, you guys probably might not have access to that. This is more on the enterprise side. But Blueprint and C++. Are you guys familiar with the difference between Blueprint and C++? A little bit? No? Okay, so Blueprint is the visual scripting language in Unreal. So it allows you to literally visually script and create things, and it's great. It's awesome. I'm an artist by trade, and I love it. The difference is C++ is a little bit more optimized. It runs better, runs much better. But the thing to remember is that everything you do in Blueprint interjects back to C++. So you can actually convert blueprints to C++. So use blueprints for prototyping, for lightweight stuff that doesn't require a ton of complexity, even for like prototyping. So it's perfect. And that's all built in. So that's where you can do two of these. I recommend if you're doing a new project or it's lightweight and you're not going to do a lot of like C++ injects or something, just click Blueprint and you can click on any of these guys. The cool part about this is no matter which project you click, it's not like you're getting a different version of the engine, you're just getting some content that's prepackaged with it. So for example, one that's pretty popular is the virtual reality project, and you'll see when you create the project, there's a new virtual reality. There's actually 2 folders that are created. One is for your main character, and the other is the content for VR, which is like the hands, the controllers, and all that content. So again, same engine. If you select any of these, this is just simply some starters. They're really great, especially like if you're doing a VR project. You don't really have to go in and create a bunch of stuff and try to inject it. It's already there from the start. One thing I will say about this too, and I'm going to sound like I'm knocking Unity here. I don't really like Unity's integration with VR because you actually have to get like secondary plugins to inject with it, whereas Unreal is just packaged in there, so it's really easy to use. Okay, so yeah, so you could select any of these projects, a blank one, first person, third person, whatever it is. And then really, if you select these 2, so maximum quality and desktop and console, again, it's not like you get a different version of the engine. It just sets a couple flags in there to make it more optimized. So for example, if you're doing mobile, it's going to disable a couple things that don't run on mobile, so it just makes it easier that you don't forget to uncheck those. With starter content, without starter content, one thing to note here, if I've made note of this in the past and in several videos too, the engine itself has some content built into it. That is not starter content. Starter content is like a couple example maps, so if you wanted to see how they set up a couple materials, a couple effects, that's your starter content. And very similar to like what you would do with any of these kind of presets, it'll create a new folder in your project just called starter content. So just know that the engine content will always be there because it's built into the engine. Starter content is just some additional examples. And the final last thing is just selecting where you want to place it and your project name. So just know that if you're like creating the location, the folder location, that's the root. Whatever you name your project will automatically create the project for you, if that makes any sense. So like I'll show you here. So this is the project that I'll show you that I have open. I just simply put it in this KC Unreal Devs folder, and I named the project MP22. And so it creates that folder there for me and everything that's in there. Cool, okay, so I'll close this guy out because we don't need them anymore. And we'll go to this, learning resources. Again, I think this is something too that might be a little bit buried, that I think some people miss. Unreal, the Unreal side in particular with Epic's education is pouring a ton of money into resources right now for video and content. I don't have it up right now, but if you just go to unrealengine.com, there's the Learn tab, and they have all kinds of courses in there. I will say over the next year, you're going to see a massive inject of content. Some of these different courses, I don't know if you can see there, the Constructing Believable Environments, they literally take you from start to finish. So doing like lighting, how to inject the assets. I want to say that course is like 36 different videos that you can go through. So you're going to be seeing a lot more of this kind of stuff posted. There's already videos and stuff up there, but that's a really good way to just kind of follow along step by step if you like videos, and YouTube kind of is lackluster in terms of, well, I want the complete process from start to finish. So the Learn tab in the Unreal Engine side of things is perfect for that. Second thing too, and this is another interesting thing that, again, I'm surprised that a lot of people don't know. So if you go back to your Unreal Engine launcher, there's this Learn tab. Now, you'll have to click the Unreal Engine portion. I'll make note of this one a little bit too. Documentation will take you right to the online documentation. Video tutorials, I believe that this takes you directly to the Learn tab. Let me double check here real fast. I think it will. Yeah, there it is. So there's the Learn tab. These are all the different courses. So if you go to like course library, there's a ton in here. Let's see. Advanced techniques. Actually, I saw this one. Fabrice did this one. This is for doing advanced lighting and setups for ArcViz. So you can see here's all those video modules. You can play with them. Again, all free. This is all access. You don't have to, as long as you've got your login for Unreal Engine, which is what you use for the launcher anyways, that's all there. So yeah, so that'll take you directly to that. The community wiki. This is actually being phased out, if I'm not mistaken. It's being replaced a little bit, but I digress. These very top kind of 4 things, they're actually links to documentation and stuff, which is really good. So if you're just getting started with Unreal, like in your guys' case, absolutely click this. This is a good step-by-step guide. If you're an artist, go through this. A level designer, you can click here. A programmer, quick start. Great tools. The other thing, which I think is kind of hidden, which I find is very interesting, is all these things down here. These aren't just like document links. There's a little cloud icon. That is a full, complete project. So you can go through any of these. So, for example, content examples. If you've gotten to the engine, you're looking at, hey, I'd like to actually figure out how they did some of these material setups. Go ahead and download this content examples. It'll create the project for you, and they do a really nice job of showing the documentation in there when you go through it. Like, oh, this is how we did particle effects, and you can click those items, open them up, see how they did it, backwards engineer. Really, really good. There's some other kind of cool things in here as well. If you're getting into like the cinematic side, there's Sequencer. So it's a full kind of cinematic sequence with pre-baked animations. That's a really good project. Infiltrator demo, that's another nice one. And then I believe there's a few others in here as well. But anyways, all of these have projects. Oh, that's a new one. Realistic rendering.
Yeah.
So yeah, so download it, deconstruct it. It's awesome. Super, super nice. Okay, we'll jump back to here. So that's kind of the learning resources. There are some other things as well, like which I'll get to, the forums and stuff like that. Okay, so documentation. I know I hit on this a little bit. This is extremely deep, which is nice. So there's a lot of documentation on just about everything that's in the engine. I just took a screenshot of kind of the web page, but it's docs.unrealengine.com. If you go to, I think, the Learn tab, that'll do it as well. And the launcher, if you go to Learn, at the very top, click documentation. It'll take you to the same place. This is really good because as the engine evolves in different subsets, they always keep this up to date. So that's the best place to start to search. The other resource that you have is, again, once you've created your Epic account, which is what you use to download the launcher, what you use to play Fortnite, you do have access to the forums and Answer Hub. So this is a great place if you're stuck and you want to answer a question, you want to ask a question. Answer Hub is a great place to do that. Go onto the forums as well. Now, there are kind of some hidden things I didn't take a screenshot of, but like if you're starting to do development for PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, which is obviously some advanced stuff, you'll get access to other areas in the forum as well. If you're a creator, so you create content, you get access to the content like creation side of this thing. And so it's great. There's a lot of resources you can connect to other developers, which makes it really good. Where can I find content? So how many of you guys have like game dev experience in the sense of like have made a game or at least kind of dabbled in it? One,
Well,
two.
haven't released a game.
Yeah. So the key that I get on here is kind of the dabbling, also known as the rapid prototyping. What's really cool about this, so we create content for the marketplace at our studio too. The marketplace has all kinds of assets. I think the last time I checked it has like 47,000 different assets. But it's got things like audio packs, it's got like kind of pre-built blueprints, scripting things, it has content, art assets, things like that. The cool part about this, and actually I took a screenshot of the EULA from this, everything that you download from the marketplace, you can use for commercial use. You don't have to give credit to whoever created it, and you can modify it to your heart's content. So it's awesome from that aspect because you don't have to worry about, again, I think where marketplace content is very beneficial is if you're rapidly prototyping ideas. So, if you're trying to put together, well, this is a game, right? That's the moving components, but you don't want to spend 6 months trying to create the art assets. Go to the marketplace, spend $100, $200, get some content, throw it in there, and that's it. I'll show you here too, because I'll kind of come back to this in a minute. But I did add one of these, which shows an example. Is this Greenwood Fantasy Village? It's kind of a cool little pack. But this is what it looks like when it downloads to your project. So in here, and this is actually part of the stipulations when you create content, there's a couple maps that we'll see. So you get a demo map, which is actually really, really cool because a lot of people may not know how to do really nice lighting or the atmospheric effects. Go to one of those maps that are downloaded from it and literally just pilfer it. Just steal all of the lighting and the effects, throw it into your own level, and there you go. you have every right to be able to do that, because again, that's actually part of what it is. Here's another thing too that I find that people don't know as well. Anything you download from the marketplace, you can share with your dev team. Now there's kind of a caveat to that. So if we're all working on the same project, I can buy, let's say, 10 packs and I can share with you guys. You guys can use those, modify those for that project. Now if you decide to, let's say you branch off and you go work on your own project, you can't take those with you. It's per project. But there's nothing to say that everybody has to buy the exact same packs. You can share them, modify them, do whatever you need to with it in the marketplace. Cool. All right, we'll keep going along. All right, so basics of the editor. Now, in kind of this section, I'm actually going to walk through kind of the editor and discuss a little bit about what it is, because I know it can be kind of daunting. I know you guys weren't here at the beginning. I was saying I kind of get horse blinders when it comes to Unreal, because I use it on a daily basis and I forget about some of the things because we know where it's at. So I'm going to take you through just the general interface. Again, this is whenever you create your project and you open up, this is what it will look like. So we'll just kind of go in like a clockwise fashion. So up here, obviously it's your pretty standard menu. One thing to note is, let's say for example, I've got this levels and I accidentally close it and it's gone. Everything is underneath Windows, so you can see it's here. So I can click levels, there it is again. I can tear it off, I can move it, I can do whatever you want. So this is where all of these little docking panels are. So if I were to hide all these or lose them, this is how you can bring them back. Of course, you can tear off any of the tabs, which is great. Do like that. Of course, now I've really dorked it. There we go. Maybe. Whew. So yeah, so you can modify it, you can change your layouts and everything like that. So Windows is where you're going to see most of all that stuff. Another thing to take note of here too, this is where you have some of your developer tools. I'll cover a little bit this in a little bit, but these are things for just analyzation, being able to look at some other stuff, session front end, things that you'll use as you kind of start advancing through it. Cool. This top bar here, so this is where you do a lot of your primary work in it. Source control, if you have it set up, we use this at our studio, it's great. So inside of the editor, when you're working on a project, if you save a file, and say for example that file has some dependencies to it, what's really nice with source control, when you have it turned on in the editor, it will automatically prompt you to check that file out. So it's really good. And of course, if that file has a couple other dependencies that need to be checked out as well, it will check those out. So it's a great way to make sure that as you're working as a team, you don't accidentally miss things or forget to check things out, or forget to save things. So source control is really nice from that. And you can do that all within the editor.
Does that connect to a Git account?
Yeah, so in fact, actually, when you go to source control, you can use Subversion, Perforce, or Git. Git's been in beta for quite a while, but I mean, how long can you be in beta before it's like it all does work? It's like Google Maps. Yeah. Yeah, so you can do all those within it, and of course, when you click it, you'll see here's your Git path. If you're using Perforce, where's your server, your workspace, and just hit accept settings. And when you do that, this will turn green. And then everything, there's even, because I don't have it hooked up right now, you're not going to see it. But as you go through, so say for example, I'm working on this with the team, and somebody had updated this map. With source control enabled, I'll get a prompt that says, hey, you don't have the latest. Oh, okay, cool. So I can just right click on it. Of course, the map is going to preload all of it. And at the bottom where we're thinking the assets, you can do source control and sync right here. So it'll pop up another little menu that says sync. You grab it, and you don't have to exit the editor. You get the latest changes. I'm going to skip over this. Content is just a content browser down here. Little known fun fact, you can actually have multiple content browser windows. So I can go up here, go to content browser, I can have up to 4. So this is really good because if, for example, I want to keep, let's say up in here, I'm going to use a filter and do all of like my static meshes. So I can have this window off to the side where it's scanning this whole folder for content meshes, but yet I can still navigate all day long in this one to do what I need to. So you can have it before content browsers, which is nice and handy. Settings. I won't go too deep in this one because I'll explain these a little bit too. Really in settings, the best thing that you'll probably change is your scalability settings. Now this does not affect your build, which I think is very important. This just affects your runtime performance in the editor. So, say for example, you're working on, say, like a laptop or like a lower end machine. You may find that it's really chugging. Just go into here into scalability settings and you can just dynamically set this low, medium, high. You guys have probably seen this in games that have been created with Unreal Engine, like, oh, change your preset. Actually, most games have like a low, medium, high. It's the exact same concept. And then, how many of you guys work on mobile games? Okay. Are you guys thinking about working on mobile games? Okay. So one of the things you can do, Unreal Engine does support mobile, but you're going to want to check because there's some limitations with real-time lighting and baking and stuff like that. You can actually switch your shader model. So shader model 5 works for, I want to say PlayStation 4, Xbox One. I definitely know it works for PC. They've also got iOS, Android, ES2, HTML5. We actually use this on a current project that we have. You can switch the shading model in your editor to view that. So ES2, ES3 is supported by all major devices now, but that will emulate what it should look like on a mobile device. So it's really good so you don't have to build package. Nope, that looks like crap, go back again. You can actually view it in Engine. So that's that preview rendering quality, and it will switch over for you. Yes?
Question. So for iOS, does it have a mechanism like built in for like converting it to Xcode, or like is there anything that's built into or Unreal that supports that, or like?
Yeah, when you go to package it, that's what it does.
Okay.
So it has all of the. In fact, let me show you real quick. I'm digressing here for a second. So in your project settings, underneath here, this is where you have your platform. So there's iOS. And this is where you import your provisioning, your certificates, so you can actually export to the engine. And then you have all of these other things, so metal shader standards that you can have, minimum iOS versions. So you literally set all these in your project, and when you click build, it does all of the fancy back-end work and compresses it out. So, yeah. But yeah, in the settings, this is simply just to change your viewport rendering so you can actually preview what it would look like on the platform. Cool. So we'll keep going on. You guys might not have DataSmith. Are you guys familiar with what DataSmith is? Okay. If you want to sound really fancy at a bar conversation or just sound like you're really smart. So DataSmith, that's an enterprise level thing, which is, it's actually really cool. It's for taking like CAD data. So you've got millions and millions of polys, lots and lots of data, and literally it just crunches it, puts it in Engine and runs. So that's what you see in a lot of ArcViz. But again, you may not have this on yours. I have this just because we have that support.
Isn't that what the live link uses in order?
Yeah, partly. So basically what it does is it takes the CAD data, wraps it into a DataSmith file, and that DataSmith file acts as an interchange and works really well. It's actually really cool. In fact, you'll see some of the tools that kind of work in conjunction with that. All right, blueprints. So this is where you're going to create a lot of you can create an empty blueprint class. You can open your level blueprint, which works on stuff in your game modes. And again, I'm not going to go deep in that one, but you'll know that that's something you'll probably access quite often. Cinematics. So same thing, adding like a sequence, which again, I'm not going to go deep in. This is just a real hotkey, like real shortcut for it. You can also go down in here, right click, and you can do, create animation, and you can do your level sequence as well. So this is just a shortcut for it. Build. This will be one that you'll probably use a lot on a project. Build your lighting only, where you can set your lighting quality for building out, where you can do your light map adjustments. You've also got your reflection captures, building geometry if you're using BSP shapes, paths, LODs, and all that. Something to note too, if you click this lovely little button build, it actually goes through the whole list. So if you want to just build your lighting, just click this little drop down menu over here and just build your lighting only. Another little fun fact, side note, Unreal has a lot of these down arrows. They're hidden out. In fact, actually, I'll show this one later. But in your world settings, you wouldn't think this one thing here, this light mask, has that little rollout, and there's a lot of settings in it. So I think that they try to do this so it's not overwhelming and daunting, but my recommendation is, especially if you're kind of in that beginning phase or you're advancing through this, always just click these little drop downs and just see what's behind it. You'll find that there's a lot of good settings in there and things that you can tweak. Cool. And then play. This is where you can actually play in your viewport. So if I click play right here, I don't think there's a character, but you can see now I'm actually in the game playing. So you can easily just test build whatever it is. This is where it actually started me, which is my player start. So I click play, you can see I start there as well, and I face that direction, the blue arrow. So you can play an editor. You can do, if I had a VR headset attached to this, say you're creating a VR game, VR preview is really cool because you can actually start the experience, start the game in the headset, and then test it, click escape, come right back and see it here. Standalone game is exactly what it says. It will actually create a new instance of whatever it is you're playing to pop out. One thing to note though, that I think a lot of people might not know, so running this editor window has a cost. So in order for me to do this, it's actually taking GPU and CPU times. So if you really want to get a good, accurate estimate of how well it's performing on your system, when you do standalone game, hide your editor. And then you'll be able to profile it exactly because it's not going to be running the editor in the background. And then finally, the last thing is launch. So this is where you can go in. I think I've got this towards the end, but where you can just launch it on the different platforms. So like iOS platform, you can build it out. This will actually build it and deploy it. This is probably the best true test of your performance. So when you get done with your project or you get into a point where you want to test it on your platform, you're going to use the launch tab. Cool. Okay, so that kind of takes us through the main kind of top bar. Let's see what else. World Outliner. So this is kind of just your scene hierarchy. So everything that we actually have in this scene will pop up here in the World Outliner. So for example, I can select my skylight, which is right here. If I decide, let's say I'm going to drop another point light in here, you'll see that point light pops up. So your World Outliner is basically just your hierarchy. It's everything that's in your scene. So if you need to click something, move something, adjust something, it's right here. In conjunction to that, that's where you have kind of this details panel. So every item that I click, you'll see that I've got the ability to go in and make changes to it. Cool. I'm going to skip levels and layers because that's a little bit more advanced. And then finally, the last thing is just down here, which is your content browser. I do recommend this. This is how it kind of looks by default. If you click this little button over here, this is your panels. So this is a great way to just go through everything that you have in your project. You can create folders. You can move stuff, you can change stuff, but this is where it's going to reside in your project. This is your content, if that makes sense. In fact, actually, if I show you guys what that looks like. So this is this is the actual project that we're looking at here. So you can see in my content, this is where I've got collections, developers, and this is at Greenwood Fantasy Village. So when I add things to it, this is where it pops up. So it'll be in there, and that's what you would share. All right, cool. I think that covers most of the basics. Any questions that you guys have? Again, feel free to interrupt me at any point. But that is kind of the basics of the editor and what you guys will get out of the gate. All right, cool.
And you, when you create your project, you can intermix blueprints within the C++ project
Absolutely.
and C++ within the blueprint.
Yep, absolutely. They crosstalk with each other. Again, underneath the hood of Blueprints, it is C++. You just got to know because it's the visual side of it, it's slower. But again, it's only in certain contexts. So for example, if you were doing a massive time of day system that was ticking, Blueprints is going to run extremely slow. You'd want to do that in C++. But you can prototype it in Blueprints, convert to C++, or talk to backend systems through it. All right, cool. So asset importing and content management. This is pretty simple. So, let's say, for example, that, you're kind of the level designer, project manager, you're doing everything. I'm an artist. I need to give you some files. I want to give you some content of what you need. It's as simple as models can be in FBX, but they can also have materials and textures. And the other thing that I can give you is just plain textures. Everything else you can assemble inside the editor, inside the engine. So materials and all that. So if I take, for example, like this barrel that I was using in the screenshot. So this at some point was just an FBX file. And there's two ways I can do this. I can right click in the editor here, and I can, if I find an open spot, well, you can right click and you can do import, or what you can also do is this little button here. And this is where you can navigate to your FBX file, pull that in, and you will get this asset. The other thing that you'll want to do too is actually creating materials in the editor. Now there's two different types. I've covered this before, but I'll just highlight them. You can have regular materials, which is not what this is. This is actually the material. So it has all these graphs, all these nodes, and you can set it up. You can change the different shading model. Other little known fun fact, this actually integrates and is tied directly back to HSL code. So you actually have full shader code. So if you know what that is, going deep stuff, you can directly target HLSL, code in that. But this is the basic material. Now, this is great because you can do a lot of things with this. But this isn't always so fun because if you're creating multiple materials, you don't want to use this route. What you want to do is use a master material, which is what this is. The difference being is, like, for example, this texture that's right here that we've imported, we've actually right-clicked. So if I do texture sample, you can right-click on this, convert to parameter. And that's the exact same thing that we've done here with this vector. And by converting it to a parameter, we expose it for our material instances. So by using this one master material, this mopaque, you can create these instances and change those values. So whereas we had that one texture, we can change it per instance. So if I go back to this section here, we have one master material, which is what's in this folder. And then what we have is all of these instances. So if I open up any one of these, you can see it's the exact same values for every single one. So this, super, super awesome. I know there's a lot of good tutorials out there. Shameless plug, I've actually made one myself on YouTube that covers everything in depth. But this is a really great way of standardizing your workflow and making your life really, really easy. So that's kind of the materials and importing assets. So again, all you really need from somebody, whether it's an artist or somebody, is you just need an FBX, or you need some textures from them. If they're sending you blueprints or stuff like that, one thing to note is, I'm going to go into here, and I'm actually going to open up, say, one of these materials. If you notice, all of these guys are .u assets. That's what you need to send. So what a .u asset is whenever you import something in, it packages it, makes it something really nice in Unreal, and that is all you need to drop into your editor. So for example, if I created a bunch of, going back to this, let's say that I created a bunch of these meshes as FBX files, I don't need to send you the FBX files. If I've imported them into the engine, I just send you the .u asset, and it's all included in that. Now granted, if you did want to make some changes to the original, then yes, you would need it, but just know that whenever you're sharing a project between multiple people, you only need the .u assets. That's already ready for the engine. Another fun fact, side note, if, for example, I send you a .u asset, you throw it into your content, and it doesn't open, you don't see it, chances are it's a different engine version. More than likely, 99% of the time, it's because you used a later version, and I've got a previous version. So if you're working on a project and you know you're going to be working with other people, do yourself a favor and tell them ahead of time, this is the version of the engine we're using. So if you're using 4.19 and they're making something to 4.22, you're not going to be able to see it. So hopefully that'll save you some headaches of understanding why it doesn't work. All right, keep going through here. The tools panel. So if I jump back into the editor, also known as the modes panel. So under window, it's modes right here. This is kind of your general, the majority of things that you use a lot of the time. One thing to note though too, that for any of these like point lights, spotlights, or stuff like that, you can also create them in the editor. This is just a handy way to do this. So I won't go through all this, but just know this is where you can place most of everything that you need. To be honest with you, I don't usually click this at all. I usually just type. So for example, if I wanted to add a post-processing volume, I can just type post, and there it is. I can grab this guy, drop it in, and there's now our post-processing volume. So that's kind of the modes panel with just this, the placement, I guess is what they call it. With painting, how many of you guys are familiar with like vertex painting and doing like different stuff with that? A little bit, okay. Where this comes in super handy is you can create very complex material shaders that you can actually paint the details in. So for example, I did this one in a previous talk where I've got a really nice like clean tile, and then I've got one that's broken. And with my material, I set up a parameter in there which allows me to vertex paint where I want the broken one to appear. So I can have, like a runway long piece of geometry, and what I can do with the vertex paint is just isolate where I want to have my broken tile. So super, super awesome for really big surfaces or creating variations and stuff. But just know that in order to use that, so for example, if I take this floor here, and I don't think this has enough, can you see the green square below my guy right there? Those are the vertices.
Oh, tiny green dot.
Yeah, the very, very tiny one. I'm kind of hovering around it. So I could open this up, but you can see that those are the vertices that I could paint. So if I go into, let's say, RGB mode here, and I'm just going to select my red channel, paint white. Maybe this might be a BSP shape. Let's see if it actually pulls up. Maybe. No. Anyways, what you'll be able to do is this is where you can vertex paint. Really, really cool feature. Again, I'm not going to dive too deep in this, but there's a lot of cool things you can do with vertex painting. But this is where you do that. Landscape. At some point, you guys are probably going to have to create a landscape. Now, there's a couple ways you can do this. You can just create it, kind of like what you saw me doing here. The green checker pattern indicates that it's in preview. So this is letting me know if I change, for example, my sample size, go down to like 7x7 quads, or I go really, really big, 255 maximum. This is just the preview of it. And then all you have to do is just click create. This will create your landscape. We can go in here, we can sculpt. Let's just say that I'm gonna do noise, take it down. There you go. So now I started painting the landscape. This is how you manage it. Now if you ever want to go back, this is where it is, just your landscape in here. I'm going to delete this. Something to note too in your landscape, where this comes in super handy. So the landscape tool and the foliage tool run in their own what I consider sub-engines inside of the engine. So they're really, really good for optimizations. Landscape in particular has automatic LODing per section. What that means is that you can paint really, really nice, high quality details in it, but the engine is going to automatically handle when that phases in and out. So by using the landscape tool, you're taking advantage of being able to create some nice terrains, do things, but then also keep it optimized. Because if you're just to import a mesh that's a terrain, say from like, Maya 3D Max, that's massive, it's bloated, it's viewed as a model, you're not going to get the performance of it. The second thing that you can do as well is you can actually import a file, say from like World Creator, I think Creator Machine is another one. Basically any kind of height file. Another kind of fun fact here is that you can actually download some of this stuff from open source. So like with Google Maps, they've actually got that satellite data. So say for example you wanted to create Mount Hood or something, you can download that height file, import it into here, and then your terrain will actually conform with that. So more advanced users, like what we do at our studio lot too, is we'll use like World Creator, get some really nice erosion and stuff like that. But that's the easy way just to import this. Another little side fact to this one too, even after importing your terrain, you can still modify it in the engine. So if you go back to your main engine, like your sculpting stuff, kind of what you saw me do, you still have access to all those tools. And finally, the last one that I'll kind of cover, I'm going to skip BSP shapes, is the foliage tool. So with the foliage tool, easiest way to do this is you can grab any kind of mesh. So for example, I'll grab these boxes and we'll say some of these guys. Any static mesh, you drag into here. When you click these guys, I'll show you. This is where you get all the parameters for it. So your density, your radius, and all that. So by default, when you drop them in, I don't know if you guys can see how they're all checked. You can hit spacebar or just have them selected. When they're unchecked, you're not going to paint it. So I'm going to select, say, these fern guys real quick. I have it set landscape and static meshes, paint it. There we go. So now I've got some foliage. I can go back to here, uncheck these guys, and say I want these boxes. So I'll click my boxes. I can do paint density here, or with them selected, say, I don't want them to be 100, I want them to be, let's say, 20. So a lower density per square kilometer, which means it's not going to paint as many. Go in here and paint, and then now I've got my boxes. So the cool things to note here, your brush size, your paint density for global, your ability to paint, again on landscape is kind of what you would figure by default, but also on static meshes, so you can paint things. I've actually seen this used, which is kind of a creative way to do this. don't think that it's just for foliage, as in like plants. You can actually clutter and scatter things across your scene, like say for example, trash or debris. It's a great way to do it. The cool part about using the foliage tool is it's very much like the landscape tool in that it's kind of its own little sub-engine. So with foliage tool, you can have millions upon millions of different resources in there, and it's not as heavy as if you were to hand place all those. The reason for that is it's using instancing, which, side note, 4.22 uses instancing built in, but just know that the foliage tool does it a little bit better, only from the sense of you can clutter a lot of stuff around there, and it's not going to be as performant intense, if that makes sense.
You were saying 422 on does instance meshes for things other than foliage also? Or
Everything.
Really?
It's literally, so when I found that out, I was actually, I forgot his name. I think his name's Chris. He's a developer for Epic. And he was presenting out there, so I said, wait a second, let me just hear what you just said. He's like, I'm like, instancing is on by default. He goes, yeah, it's on by now. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, it's pretty, because prior to 422, and what that means is, so for example, the ferns that we created here, I've got 3 of them. What instancing does is it basically renders one of them once and the rest is a pseudocopy. So it means that it's not actually taking any cost to draw that additional. Granted, the caveat is with polygons, but it's super, super awesome from that perspective because that means you can have a lot of the same asset and you're not costing the engine anymore. Prior to 422, if say for example, if I'm going to use this darker green fern here, prior to 422, if I added all those in there, they would be considered their own individual meshes. But now with 422 and plus, because I've added more than one of those meshes, they're all just considered one cost, one draw cost. So it's super, super nice, and that is by default. That's in the engine.
And that's only static meshes, right? Or is that also work for skeletal meshes?
Don't quote me. I think it's only for static meshes.
Yeah.
I think with skeletal meshes, there's something they've done with optimizations on it, but I think that's only on LEDs. Yeah, but static meshes, for sure, yes.
So that's
Cool. Okay, so I think that covers it. I guess I'm gonna know. So what geometry is this allows you to actually create different brushes, so you can kind of model an engine. Again, I'm not gonna highlight it just because I'll be honest with you, most of the time it's much faster and easier just to model outside of the engine. So using like Max, Maya, Blender, which is now gonna be, there's gonna be training resources supported, but Max and Maya.
Yeah, I think the like the 3D or third person one just has a bunch of those squares.
Mm-hmm.
That's the staircase and platform that you run around on.
Yeah, I think those are still actually static meshes.
Well,
They're not
converted
BSP
into
shapes.
static, so you can you do it, you design with that, and then you convert it to a static mesh afterwards.
Yeah. One place where
It's like right click.
BSP shapes actually are handy is again back in that prototyping phase. Say for example you're trying to figure out how big is my level going to be. So you can like just build it with some of these quick blocks, play test, and like, yep, this is good. And you can then export out those shapes to, say for example, an artist, and they can just like, this is the size, just make it fit this. All right, cool. So you've essentially given them guide rails. All right, lighting basics. So this is gonna be a fun one. All right, so I'm gonna go into. I'll show you this one too. This is that pop-up too that you'll see with source control. It'll actually tell you to check it out. I'm not gonna save it just because we have this. Okay, so this is a fun little scene. Again, this is from a marketplace asset pack that you can buy as well. So at some point you're gonna have to have lighting, so you can see what you're doing. And I'm gonna pretty much keep it super simple on the basics. So this particular one, there's a lot of these individual kind of point lights that they've added, but really at the core, you're gonna have directional lights, point lights, spotlights, and skylights. Rec lights are actually rectangular lights. They're very expensive, so just be careful with them. Expensive in terms of you really don't want to use them for real-time lighting unless you've only got a few of them. If you use them for bake lighting, They're also expensive as well in terms of calculations, but they're really beautiful. So just be aware of that. The two primary ones that you're going to use are directional light and skylight, which is what I'm going to highlight in this. So there's limitations on mobile devices, there's limitations on PC as well, but your directional light and your skylight are going to be your two primaries. So for example, if I go to this one, skylight. Skylight is your ambient. So I don't know if you guys can see this. Of course the scale is going to be horrible. So if I take this down to like 1, actually I'll take it down to 0. Your skylight is good positioning, yeah. So your skylight is basically your ambient light. It's great, it's cheap. Without going too deep into this, there's static, stationary, and mobile. Static light means it's purely going to be backlighting. So it's not going to have really, it's the cheapest cost. There's no dynamic lights. So for example, your character walking through a static light, no shadow is going to be cast. Caveat with that is it still bakes into your light mass propagation volume, so you will get faux lighting, but you won't necessarily get the dynamic shadows. Movable, which is exactly kind of what it is, it's fully dynamic. So that means if a movable light, your character is going to pass through that. At a minimum, you want at least one dynamic light so you have some kind of shadow being cast, but just know that that is a little bit more expensive. On mobile devices, you've got a lot more limitations with it, but that's what it is. It's just fully dynamic. And then stationary is kind of this in between. Now, if you notice when I've been highlighting over this, it has a little pop-up so you can read this. Stationary does actually both. So it allows you to have partially baked lighting, so it'll also go into that really nice, very beautiful light, but then it also casts dynamic shadows for movable objects only, if that makes sense. So for example, if I have let's say like a banner that has a vertex animation, so the mesh isn't moving, but the banner is, with a stationary light, it's not going to cast that shadow of it moving, versus if I switch that to dynamic, we'll get the shadow of it moving, if that makes sense. So skylight, again, is going to be our ambient. So this is kind of what fills it in. And there's two ways we can do this. A captured scene, which is what this is using, which just says, hey, when I go build, boom, I've looked at the scene, and I'm going to kind of reproject that color. So that's exactly what that does. Take this back down so it's not as bright. And then the next one, which is our directional light. For those of you that are familiar with lighting terms, so directional is just omnidirectional. It's like a sunlight. So it's not going to cast like radiant shadows. It's just directional in that way. So by adding this, you can see if let me turn this off, the snapping. And again, this guy is set to stationary. I'm just going to set him to movable, so it's fully dynamic. You can see that that's where we get all of our cast shadows. Let me bump this up a little bit more so you can see. So at a minimum, those are the two lights that you want to have in every one of your scenes. Is a stationary light and a skylight. The rest on this one too, so for example, let's say using the fun thing, let's say that this house is important and I want to draw the player's attention, right? I may go in and add like a warm light here. I'm going to use temperature. We'll really warm it down. We'll take like 4. There we go, and maybe duplicate this. Okay, so with that, I just very quickly added, this butterfly's killing me. So I just quickly added a couple lights in there. I can take these guys, I can switch them to static, and now when I go to bake my lighting, it's gonna look really, really beautiful. Now, I don't wanna make sure I skip over this. Are you guys familiar with light baking and what I mean by that? A little bit? Okay, so, damn butterflies. So, when you use dynamic lights, it's great, but part of the trade-off that you get in order to have your runtime performance is one of the things that you guys with dynamic lighting is there is a cost to that, right? Like we can't get really crisp, beautiful, awesome shadows there because we got to trade that off to get that same butterfly to get that real-time performance. So what we do in conjunction with that is baked lighting. So that's actually using a solver. It's CPU intensive. And what it does is when you go up to remember under build lighting, it will take a look at all of our stationary and movable. So if you remember correctly here, these two, stationary and static. And it will actually calculate the fall off and give you these really beautiful shadows. It's awesome. it's glorious and everything, but it's not real time. So just understand that you're going to use both in every project. But that's what, like in this situation here, where I've added these 2 additional point lights just to, again, highlight this, I want you to go to this place. By setting those to static, I'm going to get that really nice baked lighting, and it's going to look good in my scene, but not be performance intense. Cool? I'm probably that damn butterfly, whatever. We're going to leave it. Okay, let's see. This
That's
is
a
my next.
particle effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, let me jump back. One of the things that I did want to make note of, I'm assuming you guys probably don't know this. If you go into your windows and levels, one of the cool things that you can do here is you can actually create a new, so for example, I'm just going to create a blank one. I'm going to put it back in our maps, and I'm going to name this, let's say Greenwood Daytime. Now there's already a daytime one in here. This developer just chose to do it differently. So I've created this new level. I can right click on it. I can change lighting scenario, change it to a lighting scenario. You can have one level with multiple lighting conditions in it. So for example, I can have one that has this nighttime lighting, and I can add in a bunch of other different lights and make it daytime lighting in the same level. On this lighting scenarios, if I go back to my world outliner, let's say that I've got my skylight, I can take these assets and I can actually add those. So move selected actors to the level. By adding all of my lights to this level, I'm effectively creating a separate lighting scenario. So I can go back in and create another one and call it, Greenwood Nighttime. Add all my lights to that. I can hide them, I can show them. And in the engine, you can actually toggle those with blueprints for it to change immediately. So for example, you could have this level, the character walks up, let's say that he grabs his hay bale, and then just a quick fade to black and fade up. You can, in that time frame, change the lighting scenario so it's immediately daytime. So what's really cool about that is you don't have to do anything differently with your content. So for example, everything that's in here, I don't have to duplicate this, make a new map. All of it exists, so all this geometry is in my persistent level, but all of my lighting is in these subsequent lighting scenarios. Does that make sense? What's cool about this too is that when you go to actually bake the lighting in this, so to finalize it, with these different lighting scenarios, it will automatically build them in sequence. So you just kick it off once, builds it, and it's good to go. I probably should have an example for you guys in this one, but just know that this is the way that you would handle being able to light the scene multiple different ways and toggle it. We actually use this, and I think I might have shown this before, for several of our ArcViz projects. So for example, you may want to have like a loft or an apartment complex, and your client says, I want to see what it looks like in the daytime, but also want to see what it looks in the nighttime. Cool. So your content will reside on the persistent level. You create a daytime scenario and a nighttime scenario, and then immediately you can just toggle back and forth between them. Cool. Okay. All right, details in World Outliner. So I kind of covered this a little bit too. Yeah, we'll keep this guy up. You guys have already seen the details, the World Outliner. So you can, very similar to what we did over our modes panel, you can type in, so I can say like point, and I can just sift out my content. So there's the 2 point lists that I added. I can clear this. You can group these things, which I highly recommend. So if you got your content, you can click the new folder, or create a new folder, you can name it. You can also, from this, so say for example, I put these in the wrong group, I can shift select these, control click them, right click, move to, and then you can see all the folders that are in my project. So that's an easy way just to stay organized. And again, the World Outliner will have everything that's in your level. There's nothing that's really hidden. So if you add it, it's in the World Outliner. The details panel, again, this is what pops up when you have anything selected. This is literally just all the information about that particular object. Again, same thing here too, where you've got these little advanced roll-ups. Pop them out. Again, if you don't know what's in there, take a look, see what's there. But there's a lot of things that happen. If you have blueprints, which I believe one of these. Okay, so they don't actually have anything here. But for example, this was created. This is just a blueprint. I'll show you guys what the blueprint editor looks like. So I go to the viewport. Now this particular one, this was purely set up as just a prefab. If you guys are familiar with prefab, it just means a collection of content that I know I'm going to use over and over again. It just consists of this point light and this kind of little fire and this little stand. So it just makes it easy so I don't have to add all three of those every single time. But in there, in your blueprints, you can actually do some other complexities with it. So, you know, say for example, I had this point light, but I wanted to expose the ability to change the intensity of it. With blueprints, I could easily just create a couple little nodes in that. And when I drop it into my level, that parameter that I expose will be over in my details panel. So I can just kind of change that on the fly, if that makes sense. Cool, okay. And then the other thing as well is your world settings. This is something that, this affects just this particular map. So if you see here, right, we've got 4 total maps. Each one has its own separate world settings, but your world settings is where you control, in particular, your game mode, your lighting builds, your kill Z, so as the player falls down, at what point does it just say, okay, you died, reset. And a couple other settings as well, which again, a little bit more advanced. The key part that I definitely want to highlight is your light mask settings. So again, this has to do everything with your baked lighting. So by default, it's kind of rolled up just like this. But if you expand this tab, this is where you can change a few parameters. Now I won't go through all these, but this is where you can change a few parameters to get a better baking solve. So for example, if you're baking, you're lighting it, you're like, hey, I'm getting some artifacts, or maybe it's just, you know, the skylight isn't bouncing enough light, you'll probably go into your world settings and change it there. That's the easiest way to do that. All right, keep going through here. Buffer and stats, yes. How many of you guys love debugging? Anybody? No. Honestly, it's actually kind of fun in the editor. So I'll show you a couple things that you may want to use. Let me go ahead and go full screen. So I'll come back to this on the stats, but in particular, if you go under where you've got kind of this lit tab, you have the ability to change it to various different things. So unlit, right? So this is what it's like, no lighting. This is great if you're trying to debug whether or not you've got a particular surface that looks too bright or too dark, and you're like, well, is it a problem with my lighting or is it a problem with my textures? In unlit mode, you can see exactly what's going on. Wireframe, this can always get messy. This is a great way just to see. I don't know if you guys can see that popping in and out as I kind of go back and forth. That's the actual meshes changing their LODs, so the level of details. So if I go back to lit mode, focusing on this guy, you don't notice it in this one because it actually does a really nice job of switching out. But wireframe might be another way for you to kind of see, oh, okay, what's happening? Or let's say, for example, and you'll see this in a little bit, let's say that I'm profiling the engine and I'm getting just some crazy on-card vertex counts. Something here is extremely expensive. I could pop into wireframe mode, fly around and look, and let's say, for example, that this little hay bale here, let's say, for example, the artist was stupid and accidentally gave me the high poly and it's like 2 million polys. If I'm in wireframe, I can quickly see, oh, well, there's my problem. So that's another way to do it. Detail lighting. So this is actually all of your lighting coloration plus your normal map. So you're not going to get any of your textures. You're just going to get the normal map and your lighting. Lighting only. So this is without normal map. So exact same thing, coloration. Things in there. Reflections. I won't show it because this is it literally just becomes crazy. Player collision. This is a very important one, especially if you're building a game or something where you're running around. Player collision is the collision that the player interacts with, not fires through. So what I mean by that is, let's say that it's the first-person shooter. This collision that you're seeing here, so the player collision buffer view, is just as your player walks his capsule, he's going to hit these objects. Really, the only note that I would say to this is make sure that your player collision isn't very dense. This can get very expensive and cause your system to bog down. Now, what I was saying with the first-person shooter thing is that Unreal Engine in particular handles visibility geometry as you're firing. So say, for example, I've got a tree stump and in the middle of it there's a big hole, right? My collision will totally encapsulate it so the player can't somehow phase through the hole, but he can still fire through that because the bullets are actually going through the visual geometry. Does that make sense?
I've also had it where if you have a collision for effect, so you walk through the collision, bomb goes off the screen. If you're in simple mode for the collision, it's, you enter into it, you hit the edge, it fires the event and stays that way until you leave, then you get the off. But if you're in complex, it's actually impossible. It'll fire when you go in, and then if your model can be contained within that collision, it goes off.
Yep.
And then when you hit the other edge, it'll go turn on again with the complex.
Cool. And then the other ones that you may want to look as well. So under optimization view modes, and this again goes into more of the debugging, light complexity. So if you remember when I added those point lights, right now they're not baked. If I actually go back in and change these guys to, get our full screen, change these to movable, let's say duplicate them, and duplicate them again. Because I have what essentially is like 6 dynamic lights, you can see it gets expensive very, very quickly. Now, if I converted all these to static and bake, that'd have no cost. In fact, actually, that's what the rest of the level is, hence why it's blue. So blue is good, upwards of white is the worst. So it's just basically a heat index. Light map density, I won't go too deep into this one. Just know that for your light map density, this has everything to do with your bake lighting. If this is too low, you're going to get splotches. If it's too high, it gets very expensive in terms of you're going to have a lot of light mask textures. But if you're getting blotchy, splotchy things, look here as well. So it's probably just something with your light map density. Let's see, quad overdraw. How many of you guys are familiar with what quad overdraw is? No. Don't pretend like you do. Okay, so quad overdraw actually has 2 components to it. It's essentially the information that gets processed in the engine in terms of rendering costs. And in particular, the 2 things that you're going to want to pay attention to on here is vertex density and your transparency overlays. So I'm going to zoom into this barrel real quick because I think this is good. So you notice when I'm up close, it's all within the blue. There's no issues. But if I zoom out, do you notice how it starts to get a little bit more dense, starts to get more green? What that effectively is telling me with the vertex is the vertex density, right? So let's say, for example, that this barrel is 10,000 polys and I have no LODs. If this barrel is off in the distance, because I can see a portion of it, it's still rendering 10,000 points, 10,000 vertices. So it would look kind of like this red and this white, because it's far in the distance and I've got a lot of vertices that are packed together. That's a problem. It's not very well optimized. The second thing is, like again, what you're seeing here. So if I go to these trees, actually I'm freezing rendering. Fun little trick if you guys want to. The console is the little tilde, so right below the escape. By freeze rendering, you notice it's not drawing anything behind me. It actually froze the engine as if my camera were still back there. So it's not dynamically updating everything. That's what freeze rendering does. If I undo it, you'll see everything snap. Okay, so with this tree, it's essentially just an old school trick that's been around for a long time called X cards. So you've got basically 2 polyplanes with a transparent texture. But I don't know if you can notice, so if you pay attention to kind of this upper corner, see how it's light blue right now, which is good. But as soon as I go up, it starts to phase more into this red and white. That is the rendering side, the transparent side of quad overdraw. So it just means I've got a bunch of overlapping transparent textures. That gets expensive very, very quickly. So one thing, there's several tricks you could do to mitigate that, but just know, we'll unfreeze this, there we go. But just know that when you're in your quad overdraw, that's what this other portion is. So if you've got a bunch of this red and white all over the place, it probably means your frame times are going to be low because you have a lot of this stuff going on.
So what do you do about things like the barrels and those small stalks of grain? I mean, those have to be made individually and they have a lot of vectors on them. What do you do to mitigate that? What can you do?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So for example, if we get close to these guys, so the trick that's actually happening here with these corn stalks, so this is actually a model right now. So this is just pure geometry. So if I go into a quad overdraw, you'll notice that there's nothing there because there's no transparent textures. What's actually happening here, in fact, actually, if I let me open up this mesh real fast. Oh, did they? Okay, so this is the mesh. Now it does have LODs. So LOD 0 is our base. LOD 1 is the first swap, which in this case, I believe, yeah, it's still geometry, but LOD 2 is actually a card. So it has swapped out the geometry for an X-plane. So if we look here, I've got 8 triangles, 16 vertices. So they're optimizing it from that perspective. But if you notice when we go our quad overdraw, this is now where I'm in LOD 2. So we'll freeze it so I can go up. You can see it's all of those overlapping cards. The way you can mitigate that is there's 2 ways. We could, in this situation, make just a low polygon version of this. Now granted, I mean, this section of the map is pretty small, so it may not have a huge, but let's say that we had cornfields everywhere. So you could go in here and, you know, we could model this at really, really simple geometry and completely eradicate all the transparency. The other thing that you can do is, if you notice that where we have our performance bottlenecks is when we have the overlapping textures, right? So this particular corn stalk, do you see how there's like a lot of empty space around it? You could effectively trim that better and make it much tighter. And so then that way, instead of having this much of an edge, you've only got this much of an edge. So you actually wouldn't overlap nearly as often.
I assume this switching between planes and 3D models, that moment when you see something start to render, changing as you get closer to it.
What do you mean?
In random video games, I can't even think of one off the top of my head, but you see something from a distance and it looks one way, but if you move closer, suddenly it slightly changes. That's that. Swap.
Yeah, that's LODs. That's the level of details. And in fact, I actually didn't. I don't think I had covered this in there. You can specify that per object, and essentially.
It's gonna be my question.
Oh, is it,
Yeah.
okay. I'll show you guys real fast. I believe this guy has some. Nope, he
I
doesn't.
think the common thing is to change it so that anything that would be seen is rendered the correct way before they get there.
Yeah, so the way that we handle this, in fact, actually, I'll show you, which is really cool here. So this one doesn't actually have any LODs. You can actually build LODs in Engine. So the side note there is stop building your own LODs. It's old school, it's in the past, there's no reason to do it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna select a preset. So let's say this is a small prop. Yep, it's fine, it's gonna override it. And just like that, I literally just created my LODs. So there's my base. There's a lighter version, 118 triangles. There's an even lighter version, 58, and there's the lightest at 30. So if I save this, I'll show you what's happening. Let me find that barrel. Sorry if I'm making you guys sick. So I believe this was the barrel we just did, SM barrel. Yeah. So this barrel now, as I zoom back, you notice there's no change, right? But if, for example, at this location, I'm going to freeze my rendering, again, which assumes the camera from back here, and I go back in, there it is. So that's actually what's rendering in the background right now. So it's great for performance costs because A, it's using the same material, but I'm, now instead of rendering 236 triangles for that barrel, I'm only rendering 30. Again, it's awesome because that's all built in. Unity doesn't have that.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So does every individual object track the player's distance from it to determine, or is it like a global position? So every individual.
Yes.
one?
Yep, it's from the player's perspective. Now, one thing you can do, so I know that was like the easy button for creating LODs. You can actually go in and specify. So this auto compute LOD distances, I can uncheck this. And let's say, for example, this barrel, let me actually unfreeze my rendering. Let's say, for example, I'm running around and this thing is swapping out way too soon and it's looking really crappy. You can actually change that on a per asset basis with this on this screen size. So if I maximize this, so this barrel right now, current on screen size, I know it's really small, 0.61. But let's say at this distance, it's 0.2. I can actually go in and specify this. So let's say, for example, LOD 0 on-screen size is 1, but LOD 1, I want this to change out, for sake, I'm just going to take this like 0.6. Okay. So now, see how it changes out really quickly? In fact, I'll show you one of the other buffer visualizations of mesh LODs. So see how, because I had changed that individually, you can do the reverse of that too. So, I can take this down to say like 0.2 to change for the second one. And now it doesn't change until I'm much further back. So, really, really cool thing. But that's kind of that's the tangent between, that's one way that you can lower your cost through LOD. So again, that's on-screen vertex drawing, which in mobile is huge. Even with the Nintendo Switch, it's sad because you would think with modern hardware it'd be better, but no, even with the Switch, drawing a lot of vertices gets expensive and it actually chokes the CPU.
Mobile machines, sure. Actually, interesting question. Like you were mentioning that a lot of more modern hardware is very powerful now, comparatively to what we had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But is there any chance that it's going to get to I don't want to say that. What we're able to create now is so freaking good that there's not much further to go, and that's the quality of what you're making.
I feel like I need to insert like some kind of Japanese like, also your mind is limited, you don't know. Yeah.
But it's, I mean, the drastic uptick of graphical fidelity, I don't know.
Yeah.
We've hit a really nice point to a point where we can no longer start seeing the difference, mostly it's artistic interpretation. I would think that we would need less and less of the tricks to hide the power and the processing power as the processing keeps getting better.
Yeah.
But then again,
I think one thing.
We don't want to assume that the people playing our game has the most up-to-date technology either. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, I think
my laptop wouldn't be able to run that.
I think like one good example of that is when Unreal Engine 3 first came out, and I remember the tech demo where it was like 2 million polys on screen. You were like, what? Because it used to be like you could maybe get 300,000 polys, like total for on screen. And so like that was a huge leap. But I think the thing that has like been consistent throughout history is the more room you give, the more your artists and your programmers are going to reach that threshold again. They're going to push it to the maximum extent. I think one more recent encounter with that is RTX, so real-time ray tracing. But if you notice, what's happened is it actually just offloaded that as a sub-process on a GPU, which is great. But now what it's doing is it's now causing game designers, game developers to reconsider how they're developing something. But again, they're absolutely going to push the thresholds of it. So I think what it is you're just going to have better and more accurate and faster rendering and building of things, but I still think it's going to be just this push and pull, give us more, we'll use more.
That is,
It's
it's
like
a really
things-
interesting point though.
Things other than fidelity are starting to push the processing.
Yeah, like fidelity, like RTX is definitely still growing, but there are things, and I don't have the expertise to know what this stuff is, but I encounter things occasionally where you just see people say, this is something that was used sort of as a stopgap measure, looking into history of the stopgap measure, but this is something that solved a technical problem that's not really that much of a technical problem anymore. And I don't have the experience to know what in the engine isn't really, it falls into that category. But I think
So one
like BSP, for example, now it's just like, just use static meshes.
Well, actually, one thing that
other
is
than the prototyping.
yeah. So I've actually got a 2060 card in here. I don't know if this will actually. So I know I had mentioned to you guys with rectangle lights. So I'm gonna actually take this up. This is one very, very good example where that situation does apply. So let me take my barn doors. I don't want the intensity up. Okay, so it's probably not going to show very well in here. Okay, yeah, there we go. All right, so do you see my shadows right now? Okay, so I've got this, really nice, harsh contact shadow. With real-time ray tracing, again, there's a way I've got to force the engine into this. But with real-time ray tracing, this would actually mimic how a real light. I'm looking around to see if I can find an example.
Well, that chair has 2 levels of shading on it.
Yeah.
Because of the multiple lights that are coming.
Yeah. But basically, this is one of those situations where area lights are extremely expensive because What's actually being calculated here is not this point, so not a single point in space, but actually this entire volume. So this entire square. So you're talking about a ton of data points to try to cast a real-time light. With real-time ray tracing, it can actually process that on the GPU. And so what you would see here instead is you'd have this really nice crisp shadow where it's close, but then it would actually feather and get soft, which is more based in realistic lighting. And so that's a situation exactly like what we're seeing now is in the past, I say in the past, it's kind of still currently, that we would fake that by this light, I would probably bake it so I could get that nice dynamic shadows, whereas a year from now, you're probably going to see real-time area lights that may be moving, and so you're getting this really nice, correct shadowing, if that makes sense. So things like that, and I think that's going again. I know we kind of tangent on this one, but I think that's a situation where we're giving artists and designers more tools, but now they're just going to use it in different ways or make it faster to approach things. But you're still going to.
The bottlenecks change. I think that's sort of the point that we're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, the shadow of your monitor on the desk. You got multiple shadows going.
Right. I don't think.
So you're saying that the designers and artists are just ungrateful bastards who always push it?
We always are, yeah.
Okay.
We always ask for more, and we're never complacent.
Well, it's like polygon count per character. If you look at the first-person shooter, characters running around.
Remember the days of
As we
Ping
get
Pong?
more more power, the polygon count keeps going up.
Yeah.
It's more.
Yep, we're never
it's
happy
models.
with it. We're never going to be happy until we can just import our ZBrush models directly into it.
That and the animation.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's keep cranking here. So I know I was mentioning the other things as well. So stats are great. If you remember when I was doing my console command, you can insert anything from there. So again, like freeze, rendering, I can do that. The other thing you can do is underneath this kind of little drop down, you can pull up your stats. A few that you'll probably want to use quite often. So if we go under stat engine, you're going to want to use unit, FPS. Those are probably your biggest ones. Can you guys see that all right to the left? I know it's probably a little hard, the stats that are up there. So this is essentially telling me my frame time, my game time, my draw time, my GPU time. For those of you guys that are more new to gaming, I know everybody knows FPS. You want high FPS, right? FPS is the end part of the equation. You can have the best graphics, the best, most optimized models and everything, but you could have some kind of process running in the background that's eating your CPU. That is your limiting factor. And so you may well, why does my frame time suck? This is a great way to find that out because you can see your frame time, game time, draw time, GPU. If GPU is really low but game time's high, it means you've got a CPU bottleneck. If your game time's low but your GPU's high, it means you probably got something with your assets or texturing materials or rendering. Does that make sense? So that's where you want to use stats. The other thing too is that there's a ton of different graphs that you can pull up. I'm just going to show you GPU and scene rendering because these are two that let me hide GPU since it's off screen. So this is another way that I can profile. Again, you'll probably want to profile often just to make sure everything's pretty good. But what we can see here is that on this particular machine, again, this will change. It's dependent upon the hardware. There's a couple of things that are more pertinent to me. Mesh draw calls. I'm getting 520 draw calls right now. Draw calls, without going too deep in there, so you have vertices that you need to render. That's one draw call. You've got a material that goes over top. That could be 1, 2, 3 draw calls. So now we're talking 4 draw calls for that one mesh. This is where the instancing comes in really great because it lowers this number. But just know that if you're developing for mobile, 50 to 100 draw calls. So if I'm looking at this scene right now from this perspective, I'm currently drawing 458. I'm probably a little high. Not like that, but you know what I mean. So by using your profilers, that tells you where you sit and what you need to do, what you need to optimize. And again, there's lots of tools for this. We're not going to dive into that. Just know that that's where your stats are. And again, you can pull all these up through commands. So like stat GPU pulls that up. You can do stat none, hide them I did want to make one note on this one. Okay, so do you guys see that it looks like right now I'm locked at 120 frames a second? So by default, the editor does have a limit at that. So I can sit here, I can go like, well, our frame times are really high. Guys, we need to fix this, we need to fix this. Technically, they're not. If I use the tilde key and I do t.max FPS, you can see right there, I'm gonna change this to something like 600. See how it just dropped everything? Because the engine was frame locking it at 120 FPS, that's 8.8 milliseconds of frame time. But by me kind of reducing that overhead, so I'll actually get down something where it's a little bit better. Oh, of course, that's worse. That's pretty bad. Right there. So that basically shows me the true number. So just know that if you're hitting your 120 FPS cap, that's great. It means you're doing awesome. You're probably doing better than that. But just the tilde key, t.max FPS, and then just type in whatever you want. You can do like 600. So I know that the true value, true cost of the scene right now, I'm running 160 frames a second. So I'm happy with that. All right, cool.
I don't mean to hang on this point too long, but
Yeah.
why would it have a higher frame rate when you're looking at like two meshes this close, as opposed to looking at the whole city? That's crazy.
There could be a whole host of reasons for that. If I'm looking here, it could be because I'm also in my dynamic lighting right now. But if I go over to something like here where it's pre-baked, 200 frames a second.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you remember, I think, remember we went stupid with these guys?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So here, actually, no, so here's-
I forgot those were so.
Actually, no, that's actually a great example. So I'm running through this level, right? I'm testing it 180 frames a second. This is great. Yeah, whenever I get over to this area, why am I dropping so much? So I could go through my visualizations, right? I could go into my detail lighting. Oh, that's fine. Okay, I can go into my light complexity. Oh, there's your problem. I got too many lights. So I can go in here and let's say, I probably don't need that one, probably don't need that. He's not doing anything. Jump back into my game. 130, 140 frames a second. Cool. So that's one way to do it. Oh, I'd forgotten this one too for artists. There's the overview. These are all your buffers. So you can see they're awesome. I love this. So this can tell you if you've got problems with, like right now I have no specular channel. My roughness is pretty good. So that's an easy way to kind of debug that. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. The other oh, actually, you know what? I'm sorry. One more. I lied. Mesh LEDs. I know you guys saw this one too. So you can see them all shifting in and out through coloration. That should show me when my LEDs are switching. So that's another great way to do that. So yeah, so that's a great example. I'm glad you brought that up.
That's just a callback. You meant to do that.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks. But no, you can see that's typically how you will profile. Just figure out where am I bottlenecking, and then start just going through. And once you discover it, fix it. Okay, let's see. Project settings and plugins. Let's see. Man, this took me a lot longer than I expected. Okay, so whenever you create your project, there's a bunch of stuff by default in your project settings. We kind of saw some of this with the iOS, the Android, all that. There's a lot of other things in here as well, in particular with like your maps and modes. So your editor startup mode, you may want to change that so it doesn't always start on the default, or your default game map. So when you go to play, this comes in handy, especially if you've got multiple games. Typically you're going to have like a main splash one or where they go. That's your default. Packaging settings, again, we'll expand the rollout here. This is where you'll change a lot of things. Now there's two ways to change this, and I'll show this later. But just know you can change your build configuration. So development's going to have all your debug code or anything you have flagged to show up. Shipping build is going to remove all that, so they can't go in, do console commands and override and do crazy stuff. And there's a lot of other settings in here too. Again, lots of documentation on this for it. And then of course I did show as well for your different platforms where you can set certain things. So again, if we were creating this for Android, here's the package build, store version, everything that you need per platform. So that's going to be in your project settings. Let's see. Oh, and plugins. This is another thing as well. So before you go to ship, if you go into plugins, this is everything that's like built into the engine. There's a lot of plugins. There's things for like, you can see Perforce, Git, there's the integration for that as well. My recommendation is when you go to package, or at least if not before then, just go through this list and just disable what you don't need. If this is never going to iOS or Android, I can just disable these. And then it just saves a little bit of time on packaging and make sure I don't have any dependencies with it. So that's under edit and then your plugins. All right, keep going away. Deploying builds. I think this will wrap it up for us. So there's a couple ways that you can do this. Obviously, at the end of the day, you want to have a game, you want to send to somebody, not will you open the editor and play it for me. So there's really two ways to do that. I'll show you the simple way, which is under File, Package Product. So this, or I'm sorry, Package Project. And this is where we have all those different platforms. By default, the engine is going to have all these in there. For those of you who don't know, Lumen is actually Magic Leap, so it's the headset. I don't know why they call it Lumen. But typically what you'll do is your package project, Windows 64-bit. Do this soon when you do your project, because typically you'll run into problems with it at the start. Don't wait till the end and be like, magically, I hope it all works. So when you package this, it'll actually open up an output log. And I don't have one built right now. But this will go through and show you the building process. If there are errors, this is where they'll pop up at, and you can just quickly debug it from there. But yeah, so when you go to File, Package Project, it will create it. All you have to do is put it in a root folder, and it will automatically create all the different platforms that you need. So for example, this one is going to be Windows No Editor. That's the default one. So I could have like my output folder. I'm going to get a Windows No Editor, and inside of that's my exe. So I just literally just have to send that file, double click it, and they can run the game. Everything's packaged with it. The second thing that you can do is over under this Launch tab, you can also go under Project Launcher. Now this is something that actually we use quite often. You can go even further than this, but this is Unreal Frontend. And what this is this allows me to do some pretty cool stuff with it. So for example, this is just my machine. Windows No Editor, if you remember me saying that's how it's going to package through the File Package Project. But I can change those variants here. So for example, I could say this is just default, which is fine. It's not a client, not a server, I'll just package by default. I can change my shipping method, so debug game, development, or shipping. For those of you who know, development is a full, all of your debug code is in there, everything that you need. Debug game is a lightweight version of that. So there's some things that might be packaged, it's a little bit lighter. So if, for example, you're sending this off to internal testing, debug game is great for that because they have some console commands, but not all console commands. Shipping strips all that out. More than likely, every game that you play that's on the shelf is a shipping build. So I can change that immediately through here. I can click launch, and that will essentially do the exact same thing that I just did with my package project under my Windows 64-bit, but it will do this variation. Here's where Unreal Engine is really cool. You can actually create custom profiles. So for example, any project, which in this case is just this project, but if I expand all these out, there's a lot of other settings that I can do. So I can build UAT, which I think is it's an authoring tool. On the fly, by the book, do not cook. What this means is, let's just say, for example, I want to do by the book. So every time I click build, I want it to rescan everything and package it. This is what by the book is. On the fly means it will build once the first time, and anything that changes in subsequent builds, it just builds those. Great in theory, it's good in some situations, but just know at the end of when you're done with your project, make sure you do it by the book because you want it to rescan everything and not miss anything. But in here, this is where I can package all my stuff. So my Windows client, Windows No Editor, Windows Server. You wouldn't do that, but let's say maybe there's Android, right? So whereas before I would just build per platform, this profile will now go ahead and build all those in sequence. So you can set the platforms, cook cultures. Again, you guys at some point, if you're continuing your careers in game dev, you're going to have this, right? You're going to want a Chinese build, you're going to want to have a South American build, things that have different localizations or different restrictions on them. That's where you'll build your cultures. Your different maps. You can even do DLC patching, compressing content. One thing to note, all these settings that I'm just glossing over, these are the exact same settings that are in your project settings. The difference being is when I click my file package project for Windows, it's using my project settings, which means if I wanted to go in and do a different variation, I have to go in and change my project settings again. Does that make sense? So you have to change it manually, whereas with the launcher, the Unreal front end, I can do that with multiple profiles.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So with the DLC one, so like how? So I guess like how would it work? Would you like if you built a DLC later on and then like wanted to export it, you would just.
So for example, like with the DLC, I could set this as, let's say that part of the DLC is just a Windows client, so it's just for just a user. And let's say that I've got all these maps, but I just have a select few maps or select content. I can just select those guys in here, build DLC, name of the DLC, whatever it is, and save that guy out. And so then that becomes that package build. Now in this case, let's just say I'm just cooking everything because this is my project, but it's not a DLC. That's fine. For the release, maybe I can name this, let's say Greenwood Village 0.1.0, whatever it is. And I can save this guy. I can archive it, so I can push this to like another server. I can do it on something else, package it. Let's say that I want to just package it locally, or maybe I want to push it probably. I'm running through this pretty quickly. You guys can see there's a lot of things you can do through front end. The cool part about this is once this is all done, so let's say for example, I can say that this is, Windows no client, no DLC. I have it there. I can edit at any point. I think there's a way no, you can't. But I can create multiple variations of this. So, say for example that we're getting towards latter stages of production and I want to do a shipping build because I want to make sure that actually plays on our target hardware. I want a debug one so all of my testers can at least test some things lightweight, and I want to do an internal development build with everything exposed, but I also want to do an internal development build on the fly, right? 4 different bakes. I can create 4 profiles and simply just go through here and click launch, 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 and it will just chug away and build and all that. So that's Unreal front end. So again, this is a little bit more robust. You can still use it from this perspective, like very lightweight. I'm doing the same build over and over again, just create 1 profile. The other way for that again is if you have it in your project settings and you have it's under here packaging. So you see a lot of the same stuff that we just saw on the front end. And when I use those settings in conjunction with package project, that's what it's going to use. So that's kind of the easy way to do it, a little bit more advanced. And that concludes it. Whew. So that was a crash course. Man.
You had to rush through that one.
A little bit, yeah. So, you guys that were new, what do you think? Does that help a little bit? To demystify a little bit of stuff to it?
You're not new anymore, also.
Yeah, you're pros now.
Will be a quiz later.
Yeah. No, I think like I said, Unreal it can be very daunting at the start, but hopefully you guys can see through that. Most of that stuff is pretty consistent. You've usually got 1 button or 1 parameter, expose it, roll it out, and you'll see a lot more things you can do with it. For those of you guys that have been working with it, hopefully there's some things you learned from that too. Need more butterflies. You smart ass.
There's plenty
The
of
fact that the
training
particles
videos
are great.
as well.
I like that they're just
Like the learning tabs.
spawning and dying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Or zooming away or something.
No, they're
It's
spawning
splitting
away.
up.
Go free, butterflies, go free.
They just
They're flying to a better place.
Cool. Any questions? Obviously, any questions from anybody that's on the live stream as well?
But like, just a lot of.
Nope.
That's good.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Well, that concludes the presentation. So, no more on the editor. So, yeah, you guys, we've got literally 7 minutes if you guys wanted to hang around, ask more questions. But that concludes this meetup.
Your corn maze.
Yes.
Are those individual models just placed there?
So,
Or did you convert them all into a single mesh?
so I actually didn't author this. This was from the marketplace.
Right.
I'll show you what they did here was a blueprint, and I go to the viewport. So they've got all the different individual fence pieces
Right.
and the individual corns. I don't believe, yeah,
So
they
there's
did.
no
They did not
construction
use.
script. All right.
There's nothing. Yeah, they just simply did this as a prefab. So if I go to browse asset, this was just an easier way. At some point, yes, they did place these by hand. This was just an easier way for them to say, let's say I need to put a corn maze right here.
I was wondering if you converted it to a single mesh, you can get rid of some of the vertex overgrowth.
You can. In fact, actually, I could right click on this one. I could do merge actors.
Right.
And what this will do is this will merge all of them. I'll show you real fast too.
I don't want to destroy your mesh.
No, actually, I'll show you. It doesn't. So I'm just going to move it into a new folder.
Uh-huh.
It'll take a minute to do it. There we go. There's actually also some settings down here. I'm just using default. But now you can see right there. It's now one static mesh. Automatically converted all the textures, compressed them down together.
But did it get rid of the vertex draws from the?
No, you're still going to have your vertices.
Because of the transparencies.
So in this situation, it did. The only reason for that is because the original mesh actually has a custom third LOD. Whereas the one that I did with the merge actors, I had it automatically process the LODs, and so all of this is now just geometry. There's no draw count. So yeah, so if I go into my optimization view, quad overdraw, zoom.
Right.
So the only reason it's getting there, the red is because of, guarantee is because of vertices. Oh no, it did switch it.
Yeah.
Actually no, hold on, because I think I know what happened here. Yeah, it's still the BP.
Yeah,
there's
they did put out a new one.
Yeah. One thing to note too is it's kind of stupid how it does this. If I open up this merged, actually, turn freeze rendering back off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I go into quad overdraw,
Now.
what am I? Hold on. I guess maybe it did.
Yeah.
Oh, it did. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that's actually something new I learned. It actually retained the custom LOD chains, which is nice. I actually think there is a way. I believe there is a way you can modify that. So if I went back to my merge actors, the bottom, pivot at 0, output UVs, generate lifetime UVs. Okay, so I guess it is. Oh, there it is. So use all LOD levels.
Uh-huh.
You could specify that. The other thing I could do too is I could actually go in and just remove it and regenerate the third one.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. Okay, thank you guys. Yeah, like I said, you feel free to hang around for the next 4 minutes. I'm going to hack up though. So, cool. That
Awesome.
concluded.
So I ran into trouble with some ad sets that were created with the up parameter.